Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
First of all, you never need to convince me to watch a show that's about A, maple syrup, one of the best things made in this country, and B, the biggest heist in Canadian history. The Sticky follows plucky underdogs played by Margot Martindale, Chris Diamantopoulos, and Guillaume Cyr, trying to pull off a maple syrup heist. A heist that, by the way, is inspired by the crazy true story of the Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist that we have covered on this podcast in the past. Honestly, just sign me up now. I'll be tuning into Prime Video for The Sticky, which debuted yesterday. This is a 6-part comedy drama series. It tells the story of Ruth Landry, a humble maple syrup farmer who, in defiance of a heartless system, assembles a team to undertake the Canadian heist of the century. The target, the country's multi-million-dollar maple syrup surplus. I mean, come on. That's just about as Canadian as it gets. Oh, and if you're wondering what the heck Canada's multi-million-dollar maple syrup surplus is, if that sounds like a fictionalized element of the inspired by a true story premise, well, no, it is, in fact, a strategic maple syrup reserve, and we thought you might like to learn more about it. So to prep you for The Sticky, available now on Prime Video, please enjoy this comprehensive overview of the nuanced and surprisingly gripping story of the Canadian maple syrup industry. Randal Goodfellow is the president of the Ontario Maple Syrup Producers Association. Hi, Randal. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for contacting me to talk about an industry that I love.
Excellent. Yeah, we're going to do sort of A to Z crash course on maple syrup industry in Canada today. And I want to start by going as far back as we can, really. Where did maple syrup come from? When did it first become popular for people living in Canada?
Well, maple syrup was not like a product brought to market by some concept or anything of this nature. It was a food staple for First Nations way, way, way back for millennia. They would have stored it not in the form of liquid syrup, but more in a form of sugar, which means they've taken more water out of the syrup, and it becomes a hard sugar. And they use it as a staple in their diet.
Right, and then European settlers come along. They discover.
Oh yes, they came along and they followed the same type of approaches as the First Nations did for the first while, and then thought different ways to make their life a bit easier. And they started collecting it differently. But when Europeans first started doing it, they'd boil night and day. Sometimes they'd go out into the bush and have some sort of a lean-to there in a great big pot over an open fire. And so you were getting maple syrup with a lot of pine needles and smoke flavors in it and things of that nature.
Yeah.
And even back then, before we had good canning or good refrigeration or anything of that nature, our pioneer folk, European settlers, also took it all the way to sugar for it to store and be used throughout the year. The taste went to let's have this available as a liquid to pour on stuff or to cook with. That became the preferred way of doing it.
Right, and that's sort of the kind of the frontier application. If we fast forward to industrialization, canning, mass producing, when did maple syrup kind of take off as a consumer product in the grocery stores?
Well, you could have purchased maple syrup for 50 years ago on the grocery stores. Not that I ever did, because we always had our own. So I'm not an expert as to how early I could have bought it there, but it's much more prevalent, I think, now and able to get on the grocery store probably from the last 20, 25 years. It took off from a large-scale perspective in the province of Quebec first. And that was as a result of a very deliberate government of Quebec policy to develop rural areas, economic development rural areas in the province of Quebec. Um, and the great opportunity where they had many maple stands to actually create an industry.
Oh, that's
And
really interesting. Okay, so the government saw they had the resources in the maple forest. So it was a government initiative. Can you talk to me a little bit more about that? Around when was that going on?
I would say that's probably in the last 30, 40 years in the province of Quebec. As I say, it was people were doing it traditionally in sort of small scale. They felt there was a greater opportunity to do it larger scale. And they incented it with various programs, educational programs, uh, grants to purchase equipment. They also made available crown land that maple syrup producers could access and tap the trees on. And from there, they've done a lot of investment in research, things of this nature. They treat it as a very significant industry. Quebec produces 75% of all the maple syrup produced in the world. And if you say, well, how much does it produce of the percentage? What percentage does it produce of all of Canada's syrup? It's actually 90%.
Wow. Just in the province of Quebec.
Yes, yeah.
Do we export maple syrup? Is it an export product for Canada that we send to other places in the world?
Oh, it significantly is an export product. Big piece of it goes to the United States. Yes, they have their own maple industry, but it's not anywhere close to the size of Quebec's maple industry. And their population is much larger, so they're a very good market. Syrup goes to Asia as well as it goes over to Europe. So yes, it is a significant export product.
If you've got a sweet tooth for dark humor, Prime Video has tapped a 6-part series that's epic and absurd. Murder, mayhem, maple syrup. The Sticky is a comedy drama series about Ruth Landry, a maple syrup farmer who, in defiance of a heartless system, assembles a team to undertake the Canadian heist of the century. From executive producer Jamie Lee Curtis, The Sticky is inspired by the great Canadian maple syrup heist. Watch The Sticky, now streaming on Prime Video. So let's talk about the health and the state of the industry today. I've read a lot about climate change. Makes farming anything difficult. How does climate change, warmer winters impact maple syrup farming?
Well, this last year was a good example of the crop of 2024. The season started much earlier than usual, and it ran much longer than usual. When something starts early, you may or may not be ready to be able to make syrup. You might not be within your work schedule, particularly if you have other types of farming operations going on in what you're doing. And so some people lost the first part of the season because it just came so early. The other thing is that traditionally it's like we say, oh, well, the best type of day is when it's plus 5 degrees Celsius and nighttime, it needs to freeze. Let's say it goes down to -5. So if we keep having +5, -5, +5, -5, we end up having those are considered are good, really good days. And why that change in temperature is important is that it helps make the sap flow inside the tree, helps create the vacuum for the sap to come up from the roots into the trunk of the tree. It's internal pressures that are created. Now, what's happened though is that sometimes we're not getting those plus in the day, minus at night, because what's happening is sometimes it doesn't go down to minus at night, and so it's affecting some of the internal pressures within the trees, and it's affecting the yields. The other thing too is that we always felt that if it's cold at night, the sap that we have collected during the day that we might not have boiled on that day would basically be preserved as fresh as possible, and that's not the case anymore.
But, you're the president of the industry association. The outlook for the industry is still positive. It's not a crisis time or anything like that.
Oh no, not at all. The industry is still growing globally. president within the province of Ontario, we have great opportunities in the province of Ontario to produce lots more syrup. We actually have more tree resources than does the province of Quebec, and yet we're only roughly 3% of the overall Canadian production, as while Quebec is about 90% of the Canadian production. And it's not because we have a lack of trees in Ontario. We have lack of people wanting to do something with them.
Okay.
And,
Yep.
well, that always existed in the province of Quebec. They stimulated people to come to the industry. Another province that has done that is the province of New Brunswick. And we were number 2 position behind Quebec for the longest time. And then New Brunswick stimulated their economy, and in New Brunswick, which had produced a very small amount of syrup, surpassed Ontario a few years ago. Very deliberate economic development policy. We do not, in Ontario, have a very deliberate economic development policy for the maple syrup industry.
Okay, that's very interesting.
We have the tools, like we have the trees, the inventory.
Yeah, the trees are there. They just need to be tapped, right? Now, I'd like to ask you about a significant historic event in this country that has to do with maple syrup. A lot of people may not know this. The largest theft, the largest heist in Canadian history was something called the Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist. I'm not making that up. Thieves stole over a period of a couple of years thousands of tons, millions of dollars worth of maple syrup. What do you remember about that time, that story? What do you remember about the Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist?
What was going on was that people who were working in the storehouse where the Quebec maple syrup is stored were taking the barrels and selling them to down into the U.S. and filling up other barrels with water and leaving it in the back of the warehouse. And it looked like the inventory was there, but it actually had disappeared. Not all of it, but a significant portion. So there's some value.
And when you heard about that, what was your reaction? Did you think, maybe I should go check my warehouse and make sure it's all syrup in there?
No, in the province of Quebec, they have a centralized system into which maple syrup is sold, and then it is warehoused by an organization or a number of organizations. Ontario doesn't work that way quite so much. We have probably, as individual producers, we have our own inventory, which we sell throughout the year. So Noah didn't have to go off and, figure out, is anybody walked off with any of my inventory?
Right.
We do have a number of packers in Ontario as well, but they purchase maple syrup from others and put it in their warehouses and then bottle it. I think there probably would have and much better inventory control than a third party which collected syrup and then sold it again.
Right. Okay. Very interesting. All right. Thank you for that little trip down memory lane. All right. I have saved the toughest question for last. Randal, Goodfellow, what is your favorite way to eat maple syrup?
I could say that I just sometimes drink it right out of the bottle. And that would be true, but I think I like it still the best on pancakes.
Pancakes. Okay. I have kind of a non-traditional one myself. I thought about it long and hard, when I was preparing to do this interview. I like to eat maple syrup most on top of vanilla ice cream. That's
good too. Oh, you can't go wrong there. I mean, there's so many good uses. And I joke earlier and said it right out of the bottle. I have a client, I think he must guzzle it out of the bottle because how much he goes through. So, yeah.
All righty. Well, we'll wrap it up there for today, Randal. Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to us about Canada's favorite condiment. Such an interesting little bit of our economy. Glad I was able to connect with you today.
Thank you very much.
As you're soaking your pancakes with maple syrup this weekend, don't forget to check out The Sticky, available now on Prime Video. Thanks for listening. I'm David Smith.